We're excited to be here with writers and producers of a wonderful program. And I'm here with writer and producer Sean Miller and Naz Khan, the producer, and wore a lot of hats in this production. I've worked in some of these roles, and I'm interested in hearing a lot of this. Welcome, guys. Thank you for doing this. How are you feeling today?
Good. Thank you for having us.
Feeling great. Glad to be on here.
Yeah. Excellent. So it's about politics, and it's also about cloning, and it focuses on the story of a gentleman named Abe Stagson and his many clones. Tell us a little bit about the story and the genesis of this idea.
The movie is called The Replacement. However, one of our early things that we did to get funding for everything on here is our movie's about the first clone president and the ramifications that happens with the culture, and there's some backlash and everything going on there. And what we did to get funding for the whole project is we created a series of political campaign ads for this. One of them was called Duplicate Success, which was about how to move the country forward and how to do better with this new cloning technology and move everything forward. And the idea really kind of came from the fact that we're moving forward in technology at a rate that we really never have before, and culture and society really is kind of moving at we're catching up in a large series of ways, in laws, in the way that people are reacting to these type of things. And we kind of wanted to explore the idea of just how would this happen if we move to that next step where even our politics we're moving at this breakneck speed, and some people are left behind, some people are really going with it, and we're just at this complete crossroads.
Yeah.
Very nice. Please. Okay.
Yeah, like Sean was saying, Duplicate Success was part of our viral marketing that helped push the topic and gave us the publicity that we needed. Certainly, the way politics is right now, our last presidential candidate and the upcoming presidential candidates, we're seeing a big shift in who can actually, run for president. So we thought about where will science take us? Where will technology take us? Where will artificial intelligence take us? What part will that play in politics? And that it was kind of like a crossroads of artificial intelligence and politics, and that's where Duplicate Success came into place. And one of our clones in the film runs for the president.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other political satire or science fiction pieces about policy and about candidates that you drew inspiration from in working together on this project?
Well, I mean, I think one of the big things, one of the big slogans in the film is "Clones are people too," and the movie is definitely drawing on the idea that I suppose, currently right now we're at a place where we're moving very rapidly as far as civil rights and recognizing new types of people. And I totally predict that in the very near future, with AI coming around the corner and, clones and genetically enhanced people coming around the corner as a reality, these are going to be new social issues that we're going to have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be something that I'm sure we're going to have many people who, are going to embrace this. It's just hey, this is just like any other civil rights movement. We need to get on board, and AI are people too, clones are people too. In many ways, this is there's a totally legit argument for all of this, and probably a very moral argument for all of this, but there are also going to be ramifications for it. And in our movie, we kind of explore the idea of these type of clones that are in our world, in our movie, they are sharing memory. So if you have, instead of just having one Ben, you have, 100 of them, and they all kind of share the same type of memories and experiences of each other. So one goes off and learns piano, one goes off and learns, Latin, one learns, law school and all this type of thing. And suddenly it all just kind of comes together for all of them. and that creates kind of a superhuman. And that type of person, you want that type of person running things, and because it's going to create all this advanced technology and momentum and movement forward. But what does that do to anybody, the original, the normal, natural-born type of people? You start to create this kind of second-class society, and where do we move in, as far as humankind goes, when we really haven't had to deal with that since really the Neanderthals? And what does that move society towards? And so that's kind of what we explore.
I think I want to shed some light on the clones are people too.
Yeah.
It was obviously an artificial campaign, a viral campaign that we came up with. We even had buttons, like little buttons that we were wearing to festivals, and people would ask us, what does this mean? And it says clones are people too. In our minds, we thought that there are these clones who look like humans, but they are much smarter because they can process information much faster because they are genetically modified in some way. Although they are smarter, they are second-class citizens. They're treated like second-class citizens. Yes. They don't have the same rights that that normal humans or humans in that future have. They don't have the right to vote. They can't buy property. It's hard for them to find a partner and get married because they're a complicated being. They share memories with other clones. So we thought that there would be some kind of identity politics there.
Absolutely. Even their murders are considered to be more of a manslaughter than another because there's clones of them. There's more than one, and they tend to share these type of the memories. So it's not quite the same as killing a regular person. So it's this complex, idea of something that's moving us forward very fastly and rapidly, but something that's still considered almost like a labor class. So, and the movie centers around this transition point between, an old world thinking where these clones are, not quite the same as us, to something where they are starting to supersede us, and nobody's quite recognizing or ready for that, except for our main character, who happens to be the original that the guy who's running for president is based on, and he just sees himself as left behind and not a part of the whole thing.
I also think that our film, it's a short film, so therefore we couldn't explore every single aspect of cloning and the morality and the problems that come with it. But we've talked about this extensively as we want to expand this film into something bigger. One of the things were that these clones, they have issues too. They have different issues, right? Because they're a little different. They're sad too. They can't live a life like the normal humans do. So there's some sensitivity around that. And it's always interesting to see the world from a different perspective. So it was our way to kind of show the world from a clone's perspective, or start thinking from that perspective, so that people could think about what society would look like with clones.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that manslaughter comment a moment ago, because I'm reminded of Cory Doctorow's Down and Out Magic Kingdom, where that was a major theme, that this kind of technology generally makes murder less of a heady matter, because we can effectively be we have backups of everyone, and it's really a fascinating set of themes, and not so far removed as people might suppose from emerging technology today. Just in recent weeks, there have been a few breakthroughs. Clones of cats were made in China. This is now a service that's becoming increasingly available. This has been available for people with their pet dogs for some years, and it's not cheap. It's pushing up to $30,000 to clone a cat.
Yeah.
It's a little expensive, but these services are now available. Similarly, there has been also in China a human-monkey hybrid that was created using some similar technology. This is increasingly becoming more viable. Do you think that that this is something that you would want to try in your personal life in the future? Is this? Let's say that the legalities are no serious concern.
I'll let you go first on that.
We haven't talked about this, but we're talking about it now. The way I'm gonna die one day, right? If we don't cut my head off and put it on like a machine, like Rain from Ninja Turtles, I'm gonna expire one day. I definitely want to try it out. We'll see what happens. I don't care, but I want to see what would happen if I had a clone of myself. It might mess up my relationship because there's a second Naz who acts like me but is smarter, and Sean starts liking her more than me. Like that might happen, but I'd rather take that chance and do that and make a mark. I'd rather be the first person to get cloned than be the 10th person or the 1,000th person. I would totally try it.
It's an interesting question because I think it makes you compare yourself with whatever your clone is doing, right? So if you have a couple of clones, it depends on if you're just doing it for life extension, so that like, it's life insurance, and when you die, a new clone pops up. It's kind of cool, right? And you kind of have an immortality there. But if you have multiple clones living at the same time as you, I think inherently you're going to kind of be comparing yourself to how your clones are doing, and there's going to be this inherent competition of like, what could I live up to? And do your clones do really well? And that's kind of what we explore in the movie. Personally, I think it'd be interesting. I think it'd be neat to try. I can see all sorts of problems going on with it, but I think it would be. I think there's something that would be definitely worthwhile trying out. Yeah.
I think about it in a different way too. So up till now, we as humans have been leaving a legend behind by having children, right? Like that's our legacy. When we can't live any longer, I know people have children for many different reasons, but that's one of the reasons, right? Like you learn all this stuff, and then you want another human to learn what they're learning on top of what they're learning from home. So it just makes them smarter. Humans just become exponentially smarter every generation, right? I feel like cloning is something similar to that. Like it's just an extension of yourself, and having your clone genetically modified so that he can or she can be smarter. It's just natural. I feel like it's natural for humans to want to keep putting out a legacy that's smarter, whether it's in the shape of a child, whether it's in the shape of a clone, or it's a shape in the shape of artificial intelligence, which clones can be.
Well, and I think even on top of that, we all kind of have a drive for, like, if we have a dream that we're trying to fulfill within our lifetime, right? We may want our children to live up to that dream, but our kids are going to have their own thing they want to do, right? And it's the rebellious kid is such a cliche that they're going to have their own thing. Yet if you have your own clone or a series of people who are just going to continue to live on that legacy, who knows what you can achieve. Now that could go in a very negative light too, if you have some horrible dictator or something that can never be put down, or some type of terrible person. But you could also have somebody who, if they have a commitment to helping the community or helping society, and they never quite go away in that, they keep building on that legacy, there's something very cool that could kind of come out of that too, where you're not just going to die off because you got sick or because you fell on hard times, but there's always that community of you, almost in a way, that is going to keep uplifting that spirit of whatever your life mission is. So it really could go either way, but I think there's something really, really cool and very human about that. That AI, when we often talk of AI, we often talk about the dangers of it, and will AI relate to us in the same way and live up to our own values? Whereas if it's us, if we can find a way to make something that knows what we are and who we are and all that is human continue on forward, there's something kind of hopeful about that.
Yeah, and that's how I tend to view advanced algorithms and AI as well. It's people might want to talk about concerns from films that they've seen, but by and large, I think the best way to look at this is it would just be a massive influx in man hours, and that's going to tend to improve society when you have advanced algorithms. Now, I'll give an example. Over the last weekend, a number of us were at a book signing in Burbank, and there were some gentlemen there who were not presenting at this conference, but they were promoting their product, which is a sort of next generation digital assistant that has some capacities for being a little more helpful in creating new work products, being able to do a little bit more than what Alexa and Siri and so forth are able to do now. And recently we've also done some a study of these kind of things. Some of them would be regarded as a sidekick technology, where you mentioned, we are kind of creating an alternate Ben. We are kind of creating an alternate Sean and an alternate Naz, and they are able to sort of be assisting us. Maybe we can be having a little more leisure time, a little more focus on other things, personal things, and that sort of stuff. Direct parallels to the kind of narrative in your film. So I do have a lot of excitement for these things. I would say I might not relocate to another country on the basis of the strength of their advanced algorithms. But when it comes down to matters that could potentially be life-saving, like the technology of this kind, I might consider relocating in the future to another country that has a more amenable regulatory framework or advancement of emerging biomedicine, even around something like cloning. So it's really an interesting subject. Let's talk a little bit about production stuff. I always like to hear this sort of thing. You guys work together on this script. You co-produced this project. You're very close. How was that experience?
It's difficult because we also happen to be married. So it introduces a lot of extra work between us. So if we just had our jobs that were separate from each other, we wouldn't talk to each other for 8 hours a day, then come home and just, watch TV and go to bed. But we're constantly working with each other. We have to constantly draw a line between professional time and personal time and recreational time. But the truth is, we're talking about film when we're brushing our teeth. We're talking about film when we're washing dishes. Like, we're talking about production all the time. And for some people, it might not work, but I think for us it does. We're engulfed in it all the time. That's what we like. That's what we want to do. And it works out because I don't hate it, and I don't think you hate it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The sharing of it.
No, I mean, it really works because we both value this type of subject matter and just discussing it and evolving it over time. I mean, the original story of this started out very different than it was. It started off as kind of a what if kind of actiony type of thing with like
an army of
clone soldiers and stuff. Swear it wasn't Star Wars. Swear it wasn't Star Wars. But we kind of like eventually we were like, okay, we need to be able to make something we can actually produce here in Chicago. We're Chicago based, so we knew the resources we had here, and we knew some of the budget constraints. And when we kind of went into, well, how did this kind of world come to be, and what was the kind of utopian ideal of why everyone would go with this, and how this would become, really commonplace. That itself became a really interesting story, and we just kind of started to expand that and decide, like maybe the story isn't told from the perspective of the clone, but instead of the guy who it all was based on, and how some of these things. I mean, you look at a lot of like amazing inventions we've had over our history. A lot of them just kind of come out of like nowhere, and people not like aiming for greatness, but aiming for something kind of mediocre, and it turns into something just amazing. And that's kind of what we kind of went with. And our main character is this guy who has just kind of been left behind and was just kind of, guinea pigging himself, to pay off his student debt. And his clones go off to do these, he's flipping the channels and he sees, clones are news anchors, they're movie stars, and now they've just been elected president, and he just kind of feels like, what about me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you mention how we can't always predict what technology and where it might be coming from. You know, I think of the space race, which in a certain light was could be regarded as a very expensive publicity stunt in the Cold War. But out of that was born DARPA, and basically all of the technologies, integrated computing, GPS, that are allowing us to have this conversation now, and have added many untold trillions of dollars to marketplaces, derived from something that was more narrowly defined at its genesis. And it's interesting to try and think about how we can use our society's limited resources responsibly, but also allow that kind of meandering in things of this kind. I think it has implications for biomedicine as well.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this: there was something verging on a moral panic some months ago in the scientific communities around Chinese. Keep talking about China. Around these Chinese CRISPR babies who are still living, and they were genetically modified to prevent them from being able to contract the HIV virus. And how do you feel about these sort of uses? Do you have other storylines that you'd like to be doing around a more speculative biomedicine?
I mean, there's always a lot of fun stuff to do around that subject matter, because it's kind of what is human, right? It's the whole like Blade Runner type of concept. But this idea that we are going to, we're just going to adhere to like that human cloning is illegal as something that every society is going to agree with. I think that's hard for us to really enforce, as like China has shown that like there's certain cultures that are just going to say, screw it, we're just moving ahead with this, right. And everyone else can catch up, or whatever. And I think that's probably going to continue to go. Go ahead.
No, I think morality or not, we're going there. Like someone's going to go there, whether it's publicized or not. Artificial intelligence, genetic modifications, it's going to happen. We can say that it's immoral all we want, but someone somewhere is going to do it. There's no question about it. And I can sit on a podcast all day long talking about how immoral it is, but it's going to happen. Yes, we can make movies about it and ask the important question of should we do it or should we not? At the end of the day, I think it's going to happen no matter what.
Yes, I think the question is, I think you find some scientists like Nick Bostrom, Max Tegmark, who basically say that this is coming whether we want it or not. So the important thing is to start talking about the limitations, the safety measures, and things like that maybe we can get everyone to kind of buy into, so we prevent some type of like human civilization catastrophe from happening. I don't think that's necessarily going to be, is right around the corner or anything like that. But should China decide they are going to make super soldiers, or, something that is a version of humankind that thinks 100 times faster than we do. I mean, there's, if you look at AI, the biological circuitry versus electronic circuitry just thinks much faster than we do. And the first one to market for this type of thing is going to be, if we're 6 months behind, it's like being 10,000 years behind. And it's something that we really have to kind of take seriously, and having a race condition for the first person to be, the first with AI or, genetic engineering or the designer babies, we have to kind of work together. I think having a communal effort for these type of things is going to be key. Otherwise, it's just going to be a reckless race to the finish line. It is my worry, is my potential worry with this type of thing.
I also feel like people need to rethink the word artificial. What is really artificial? I was just reading the other day somewhere, which I mean, all of us would agree that the human mind is hands down the most sophisticated piece of machinery there is today. And there is no, it's not a coincidence. You can call it natural all you want, or you can call it natural all you want. There's nothing natural about it, unless we exclude, from the definition of artificial, we exclude the intentional amount of time and effort that was spent in sharpening this brain, and the evolution that went through it. We taught ourselves to learn over billions of, or hundreds and thousands of years. There's nothing natural about it.
I hear people.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, I hear people in our community sometimes echo this concern as almost a kind of a little bit of with a little bit of resentment, saying, you know, I am a product myself of nature. How can anything that I'm participating be characterized as something artificial? Yes. Sorry. Go ahead, Sean.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it's as Naz was saying, we relate to the rest of nature in a way where, yes, we are animals, we are primates, we are evolved creatures, but we all are also unique in the sense that we can build upon each other's shared experience. That, you know, I don't need to put my hand on a stove to know it's hot. I can watch you do it, and I can learn from you, or I can read about it. And that's something that we kind of have been able to build upon, and, you know, build kind of a collective intelligence. And now, I mean, for whatever, 20 years now, 25 years, with the internet, you know, we all have this ability. And it's so recent that we all just kind of take it for granted. And it's something that we don't even quite know where this is going to take us. You know, our entire civilization before this was, you know, regulated to, you know, learning something from direct experience or from reading it from a book where you had to go to the library or you had to be taught by a specific, you know, professor. And we're going to be moving from that to something where we have an artificial intelligence, or I think the artificial intelligence is coming much faster than any type of cloning thing in our movie. Absolutely. But we're not even quite ready or comfortable, I think, even with our internet. I mean, look at where we are with social media and everything else like that. We thought this was going to be this great boon that's going to connect humanity and everything else like that. And
it did that and more.
But it's also polarized us to this crazy extreme where we have huge amounts of tribalism in present day culture, which was kind of an unforeseen event. Now, what else could we get out of that type of thing?
I mean, we really need to start rethinking what artificial means. I mean, me going to college and learning whatever design or computer science, am I artificially learning that because it wasn't naturally like grown into my brain? It's artificial then. I'm
cultural experience could be described in those terms.
Oh yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So what is artificial? What is natural? I feel like it's natural of humans at this point to take the technology that they have created and build upon it. That's what we've been doing as humans for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
You mentioned Max Tegmark a moment ago, and he calling back the artificial intelligence thing. He's opined on many occasions, I guess, that we're going to go from a narrow artificial intelligence as we there's not going to be an AGI in the middle, because as we allow for greater agency in these systems and more versatility of function in these systems, we'll go directly from a narrow artificial intelligence that we have today to superintelligence, because, like you mentioned, there's that incredible computing power and data science infrastructure already built in that.
His simple and easy to understand example of this is like we already have narrow AI that is superhuman in many different ways. Like your calculator can do math many times faster than the best mathematician we have in the world, who's a human who's just doing it on their own type of stuff. So we have to assume that any type of AGI, as we say, any type of artificial general intelligence that can do multiple things, a broad sweeping span of artificial things, is it's not like they're going to stop and be human level where they're going to have the same limitations. They're going to have to think about it, and they're going to already have all of the modern technologies we have that narrow AI has, and they're just going to be able to put them all together and potentially be able to create and build upon themselves. And so are we ready for that? I don't think we really are. I don't think anyone's really thinking about that much at this point.
Yes, and one thing that you touched upon earlier in the talk was this idea of a loss, an inevitable loss. You know, every human being on Earth, no matter what their training or background or work that they're doing, has experiences that are significantly different from others. They have knowledge that no one else possesses, and in the course of a natural lifespan, we see that lost. We see that information lost, and that represents a tremendous loss of in the world of human development for each generation. As that happens, we're at a point now where we're able to be contemplating these sidekick technologies. We're able to be contemplating this sort of continuity in ways that was inconceivable just a few decades ago. And we're able to consider that maybe we don't have to experience that loss as a matter of course. People are resistant to that, and perhaps rightly so. It's an unproven notion that such a thing would be possible. But I think sometimes people's what I would regard as almost overly humanistic views about around death and taboos around these subjects, preventing us from maybe embracing these things, and even forcing some of these technologies to possibly become orphan technologies. We don't use them because society isn't prepared to fully implement them and even contemplate them in a very real way. What do you have other feelings about the prospects of the three of us, this conversation came up a little bit around the idea of these force multipliers in general in governance. That is effectively a part of your story here in The Replacements. And I think, as you were saying, this is a near-term prospect that we have to contemplate. This could be something that in 15 years, we might have the technology to completely reconceive the role of the nation state in terms of full automation. Tell me your thoughts on some of these subjects.
Sure, I'll go first. So as far as orphan technologies, that's interesting. The idea of what type of things might we discover that would be better for us to just leave be. And cloning seems to have been one of these things, even since like Dolly the sheep back in the 90s, as well as, I mean, nuclear technology. We're not pursuing anything, beyond Sarbama and all these type of like crazy, we kind of all decided that this arms race, we really should kind of leave some of these things behind. And AI may even be one of these things. I can totally see cloning or moving us past a post almost mortality type of way, because that's really what we're talking about here. When we talk about, you're right, this humongous tragedy that we have all kind of accepted, that we are one day going to die, and everything that we have learned and experienced and all the fidelity of that, we might write a book about it, we might record a bunch of videos about it, but that true intrinsic feeling about that is all going to go away. And that's just kind of a tragedy we all have to accept. Now, what if we had a technology where that's no longer the case? Now, how does that change society? I would expect that changes society in a very significant way, because no longer is there going to be this scarcity of time. No longer is there going to be this, I only have this much time to achieve the thing I want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great liberation for many things. I think the limitation we have in mortality also drives us to move forward in a really fast way, where we don't just rest on our laurels as much, but I think there is something great about that if we were able to achieve that. Now, I'm sure we're going to get a bunch of pushback about that from, the religious right is going to not, think, you're keeping people's souls here and you're not going to the afterlife, whatever, this type of stuff. But I think it's something that we ultimately are going to want to move forward towards. are we going to do that? Is human life going to have the same value? Even if Ben, you get into a car accident, or if someone shoots you in a mass shooting, is it okay? So we got mass shootings right now. If everyone in a mass shooting was backed up, would it be the same type of horrible tragedy? In some ways it wouldn't, and that's terrible. We would almost just see it as kind of oh yeah, it's like a car accident, but no one really died because this thing happened, and that's horrifying. That's terrible, and I think there's something kind of gross about that, and I can see that being the big pushback. No, I'm kind of rambling, but go ahead.
I don't know. Something you were saying, like, kind of made me think in a tangent. When we talk about governance, or, well, not governance, but government, right? There could be a possibility that we could remove the aspect of human from government. Mm-hmm. I can see there being an algorithm that makes better decisions than humans can. Mm. I definitely think that's possible. As humans, we are flawed. We are flawed. And just like my calculator has the right answer faster and more accurate answer, I feel like there could be an algorithm that could be the president that makes better decisions than us humans do, and we can live easier and better lives by following an algorithm. Now, we don't have to make that algorithm into some kind of god or something that we praise or anything, but I could see that happening too. But
there could be a bad version of that.
There could be a bad version of that, but there could be a good version of that too. Just like you're saying, like you could use intelligence and to humans' advantage.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'll say that I'll do a quick plug for a future show. We're going to be on the Detonation, a transhumanist program, and we're going to do this concept of a 21st century algorithm-run technocracy, algocracy. And Sean, we kind of already touched upon this. Naz, if you want to also do participate in that together, that would be fun. But so we're going to get into some of these concepts. My feeling, I think of it in terms of a few technologies. I think of it in terms of self-driving cars. Mm-hmm. Some moral philosophers, when they contemplate self-driving cars, are focused on the trolley problem set of concerns, where we can't have an algorithm making these choices of who lives and who dies. Should I swerve into the bicycle and save everyone in the car's life from going off the bridge? But when people are focused only on that, they forget that we have today 35,000 people a year dying in automobile accidents. Even a small reduction, or rather even a relatively small number of more self-driving cars on the road, it would kind of operate as like a disease vector, breaking up some of that. We could see a dramatic reduction, and full automation in this particular area would lead to automotive fatalities being probably in the hundreds. And that's I think it's a direct analog to this algocracy notion that we could be doing an awful lot better by one another by including more and more advanced algorithms in these various institutions in the public sector and in the private sector. And like I said at the beginning, it's a good problem to have that you have a lot more man hours thrown into the equation in terms of solving grand human problems. It is an exciting notion, but one that like cloning, one that fills some people with a kind of existential dread. They would want to have every assurance that that we would have humans in the loop, and they would be, of course. These are human institutions, and they want to have every assurance that this is going to be something that's not going to be itself a runaway kind of phenomena. Your film is a wonderful kind of meditation on these very subjects. Can you tell us a little bit more about the research that you did in coming up with these stories?
Sure. So when we were coming up with a replacement, honestly, some of the ideas we really started thinking about with this was how every human's lifetime is really just a series of prioritizing, what you want to drive yourself towards. If you want to be towards your career, if you want to be completely careers focused, you're sacrificing your family or maybe your hobbies. If you go with your hobbies or your families, you're not doing as well in one or the other. And what if you could what if you could expand that so that all of these would come together? It's interesting. So when I was doing this, I was actually working for a software company, and we were working with GitHub, honestly. And if you're familiar with like branching strategies and everything like that, and having like a master branch and having a bunch of branches go off it, and when I saw this visualized, I was like,
wouldn't that parallel to cloning?
If a person could have all these branching things that could merge back in, this type of thought, and that's something that we as humans can't do. We're single track organisms. So what if you could do that? And I the concept on this was kind of based around the idea that the human brain could be at some point eventually scanned. You could have nanotechnology go in and emulate observe the neurons that were interacting on a regular basis, and eventually kind of replace them or scan them or emulate them, and that type of thing could be duplicated, and but could be duplicated with the technology of nanotechnology that could move, could think at a much faster pace and could share, with the cloud type of technology. And that was kind of the thought behind it. Not the current idea of cloning, which is much more like, a clone is going to be born as an infant, is going to be completely based on its own experience and have no basis on the original. The idea we were going with was kind of a true emulation of you, Ben, or me, Sean, or Naz. That this would be the baseline, and that any other clone of this person could kind of go off of that. And we've known the technology has been there as far as like the genetics, and we know, and as well as nanotech is starting to move in that direction as far as mapping the human brain, and we just kind of anticipated where this all might go. Go ahead. What were you going to say? No?
You got it.
Yeah. I'm reminded of Robin Hanson's book, The Age of M, a reference to this emulation concept. And he writes quite a bit about artificial personalities and these the implications for a society. And it is an interesting subject. We kind of touched upon this earlier. Even in other contexts, we sometimes are not always clear about this. Some people regard the act of going to sleep, suspending consciousness, as a kind of small death, and we talk about. But when we have these capacities to be having shadow selves that have their own agency and have their own abilities well beyond what we might personally possess in a lot of these cases, it does muddy the waters as to what it is to be Ben, what it is to be Sean, what it is to be Naz. I definitely recommend that people have a quick scan of The Age of M. Robin Hanson's book. There's some ideas of his in general that I find a little bit troubling, but it's still a wonderful set of thought experiments. Let's see. Let's look at some other notes here. Do you have any other ideas on a personal level about how you would like to be using these technologies? Do you see any of these things as a kind of Pandora's box, a line which we consider not crossing?
I mean, all of them to some degree are going to be a Pandora's box. It's all just on how we use them. Used recklessly, or just first one to the finish line with AI, with genetic engineering, with the cloning we explore in our film. used recklessly, they could be the end of humans as we know it, but might be the start of humans of a different generation, right? Or of an AI type of civilization where we were just the, as I've heard some people put it, we're the caterpillar that creates the cocoon
Yeah.
to this new society that's not us, right?
Yeah. That also fills people with dread.
Yeah, as it should.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What you were going to say?
I feel like cloning is probably there's a spectrum, right? I feel like cloning is at one end of the spectrum, and there's all these other small things that come before it, enhancing the human brain. I know making a copy of yourself is something else, but it's not just a copy. The cloning that we explore in The Replacement, it's not just a copy. It's a enhanced copy. It's something better. It's something more faster. It's something more intelligent. But if you think about that at the end of a spectrum, and you think all the steps that you would take before that, what if athletes had some kind of genetic modification? I can see that becoming a huge problem.
Performance-enhancing drugs.
Yeah, right now, there's performance-enhancing drugs, but then what if there's a modification? What if I had a kid and I asked to have some enhancements in my baby?
Very possible.
That would make him smarter. So now schools won't take him because they would say that it's not the same, and it's inequality between other children and this one that's a little cyborgy. So just
it creates inequality issues itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Digital divide concerns.
Assuming not everybody buys in, and not everybody can afford to do the same level of babies designer, whatever it is. And at a certain point, if you're electing, an AI or genetically enhanced president or candidate, are you going to want to have a certain limitation where in order to be eligible to be president, right now it's you got to be 35 and you got to be an American citizen. Well, what if you had the ability to have somebody who has an IQ of 200 and is able to speak every language and think much faster than everybody? Do you want that to be? Do you want that to be a requirement? As opposed to Elmer Fudd can be president. Some or Donald Trump can be president for that sake. Where we have these old limitations, and is that a good thing? Arguably, yes, in many ways. Is it a bad thing? In certain cases, if you believe in a democratic government, essentially there's a lot of people who are going to be left, ineligible all of a sudden. And is that good for society? Yes. In many cases, it probably is. Is it kind of unequal in many ways? Yes, as well. So, and that's kind of what we explore. Is we don't kind of come hard and fast down on this is good for society or this is evil for society. It's hey, it brings a lot of questions with it.
Yeah, but I think in the running of institutions and public institutions, certainly a scenario that your film describes, where you have just a team of people who have a shorthand who are working together by virtue of being effectively the same person, same memories, but able to do an awful lot of different things. That is not going to be a bad thing for those institutions. Most of the concerns are kind of more concerns of a humanistic or being filled with some kind of nihilistic dread or something. I don't want to dismiss those concerns, but as to actual systems, these are not really drawbacks. And we're talking about the idea of a dramatic intelligence enhancement in this area. This is the argument that's being made around a neural lace technology, and this is something that's being moved into human trials for otherly abled people at this time. But it's been posited by the developers, and Elon Musk is not the only person working on this sort of thing. We should say there's quite a lot of companies doing interesting work in this area. He happens to be the most visible. But this neural lace is described as a sort of antidote to runaway AI in the hands of a corporate entity or national entity that's able to have such great power over others that creates a dystopian scenario. Neuralace is described as something that would balance that by allowing humans to be using these advanced algorithms more quickly by just enhancing their own personal computing power, so to speak. And that is effectively kind of an intelligence doubler. I've said on this podcast and other shows that I would happily be one of the first people to have that. It is a little bit of wetware. I would be happy to be one of the first people to do this and try and be at the vanguard of using that technology. And I think it could be used to really focus human development in a lot of ways. Yes. Do you have ideas about human upgrading? And you mentioned it in a fertility medicine context as well. Do you have any other thoughts on this? Anything about this that doesn't sit quite right with you?
I just want to mention one thing. It's funny that we came up with this movie idea and we made a movie, but for years we've been watching this anime called Berserk, and this guy has this arm on him that shoots rockets or little cannon hand. And that's also some kind of like modification to the body that makes you better or stronger or faster. It's just, I feel like we just keep surrounding ourselves with ways of enhancing the human body in everything we watch and do and read.
Yeah, like in the Deus Ex type of world where like everybody starts to enhance, get into, even like voluntarily sacrificing limbs or whatever for something faster or stronger or better eyes or that type of thing. I think that's all really positive. I would be personally, I probably wouldn't do like the iPhone 1 version of the
Neuralace.
Happy giant thing. I might wait until it gets a little smaller and less invasive, It's like I know the guys who have version 1 are going to be like when like 3 generations down, it's going to be less invasive, and
that is a real concern.
And it's going to be like harder to get out, all that. And I am a little bit like with the issue of basically not being left behind with AI by integrating with it. It's kind of like, well, we should just be the Borg, to some degree. But I think it probably is the best solution, basically some type of synthesis with this type of AI we're creating, so that we are a part of it and we're integrating with it and making decisions with it or as a part of it, as opposed to just creating this alien entity that thinks much faster than us, but doesn't necessarily think like an evolved organism, right? We have a bunch of baggage from, us, living in the savannah and everything else, and all of our survival instincts and everything else that makes us human. It's not as simple. We like to think that we're these completely reasonable, logical creations.
I don't think I do.
Yeah, but I mean, as
a civilization.
Yeah. As what we consider human and human values, a lot of it comes from our emotions, a lot of it comes from our evolutionary instincts, and the best version of a calculator that can think and plan and do city building and country building and control an economy isn't necessarily going to have all of the things that we have that make us what we want. And do we want to necessarily sacrifice all of those? Maybe we do, but maybe that also creates something that's much more Borg-like. And I don't mean to cast aspersions on, because I think there's a lot of like transhumanist philosophy that's really exciting and really cool. And I want to live in that world where we're living longer, and I've got my robot hand that has, is the Swiss Army hand and can do all these things, and I can connect to the internet with a thought, and I can see telescopically and see in infrared, and I can do all these type of things. But I think there's something intrinsically valuable to being human, and I think we should lose sight of that.
I think about like at what point in my life I would allow something biologically to be like, inserted or enhanced or attached to my body. If I had a terminal illness, I'd do anything. I would cut off my arm. I would put another arm on it that's more powerful. If I had a terminal illness, I would do the iPhone 1 version of Neuralace. Just see like, hey, where it goes. Let other people benefit from my human body and figure out what they need to do. But I would totally do that if I had a terminal illness. I would go out with a bang.
Yeah, and good on the people who do take the prototype and do lead technology into the next generation, which we do need to do. But the funny thing about just living in the crazy generation I think we've lived in, where we've seen the internet come and we've seen smartphones and all this technology go from not having it and living through the end of the Cold War and all that type of stuff, is we are seeing technology move so fast, with generations just coming and going within 6 months or so, that adopting one single thing, it's going to be outdated in the next. And that's something I think we all just need to get behind. That's just going to be the way it is from here on forward.
And there's a certain level of unpredictability in talking about this, and there's also a few different technological advances and prototypes of this kind. But of the Neuralace specifically, my understanding is that these very small threads that would be integrated into these 10,000 plus neurons, this would be quite separate from the module that allows you to have this interface. So in upgrading to a new module, you won't have to have a second hole drilled, something like, hopefully.
No brain surgery?
No, I
Yeah.
Well, good on that. I was not as familiar with that. So if that's the case, if it's simply like small little sensors and not total brain surgery, that sounds much better.
Yeah, it is invasive, but minimally so by this one particular model. But as you said, Naz, as an end of life considerations, I would consider things far more drastic than this.
Yeah,
myself as well.
I would take that opportunity.
Yes.
Make that decision. Right now, I can't make that decision because I'm like, I don't know if it's going to limit my life or anything. But if that choice is easier, I'd go for it.
End of life, sign me up.
Absolutely.
Just drill the hole. Back me up and.
Cut my feet off, get on a spider, like crank.
It's funny. I was reading some just got a chat thread with people who would probably be described as paranoid schizophrenics, but around the death of a gentleman, a very wealthy gentleman, passed away in recent days, David Koch. A gentleman who's now with somewhere around $40 billion, and these conspiracy theorists were positing that his brain was being emulated in a sort of head in a jar kind of scenario of this kind, and it's not beyond the pale that a person with access to that amount of capital could be at least experimenting with such a thing at that point when they are losing consciousness.
Elon Musk isn't doing that, I would be disappointed.
Yeah.
Very good point.
You're right, though, that that type of technology might be pushed forward by some greedy person who basically has the capital to just be like, screw it, I don't care how much money I'm wasting on this. I'm going to put the R&D money towards this type of thing and move us forward, even though maybe there's no they're not getting any return on investment as far as the market or anything. They're just doing it for their own selfish reasons, and
it's their stake. Yeah.
That might actually be the case, but that might also be the prototype that launches it, where it's a proof of concept that we can do such a thing. I mean, I know that Sony, when they first came out with the Walkman, it was simply the CEO of Sony was walking around the golf course, and one of his buddies wanted to listen to music all the time, and so he had his guys back at the lab just come up with something. And the first Sony Walkman was based on this type of thing. So who knows where these technologies are going to come from. They might not be from a dedicated test that's doing this for the betterment of mankind. It may just simply be something where somebody had a cool idea, or they had something they were doing for their own reasons that turned into something. I mean, look at Facebook. It was a hot knot type of thing that has turned into something that now is so powerful and commonplace. It's part of our everyday culture.
Mm-hmm. My party, the U.S. Transhumanist Party, has language in its charter documents that describes support for uplifted algorithms, AMs, in a word, at such future time when they would appear to become sentient entities. It's interesting. You mentioned Facebook, and we mentioned earlier this sometimes troubling developments in the world of new media and social media. And I think of this as a little bit of a near-term problem that we haven't maybe fully contemplated, as sort of Cambridge Analytica on speed kind of problem. Where if organizations are able to host very realistic artificial personalities in the tens of millions or billions on their servers, they can really have an outsized effect on public opinion and policy, and really be kind of micromanaging all of us. And we might not even realize the extent to which that's happening. We see that in these election concerns around Cambridge Analytica and Palantir kind of entities, and I don't see that going away entirely. I see it becoming more of a problem, and it scares me. It scares me a little bit.
Yeah, and if kind of a dumb AI, if I can call it that at this point, can do such a thing, and we are, no offense to humankind, but if we're such dupes that we can be swayed in our public opinion on whatever policy, on opinions on whatever the subject might be, can be influenced so easily, and it can be gamified to where we talk about outrage culture and this type of thing that nowadays and clickbait, where we can just be driven to do certain things so easily in almost an addictive way. What is an AGI? What is something that really understands us, like that can read and understand all of human, literature, civilization, culture, and this type of thing? Where does free will enter at a certain point? If an AI can basically, if it knows basically deterministically what we will do if it pokes, prods us in certain types of ways, will we really have much control if it can just, if we have basically Cambridge Analytica on crack, really going out there and really just saying, what, it would be better for all of humankind if we did this or this, so we're just gonna, flood the marketplace with whatever type of news stories or things that go towards their biases and these type of things. I really doubt this is the first time we're going to be seeing this type of thing. I think this is going to be an ongoing problem we're going to have as far as perception shaping with AI, and what we do about that, and how I don't know what we can do about that, honestly, because unless this is one of those orphan technologies you speak of that we kind of put on the shelf and say, this might not be good for us as a culture.
That's a very real possibility. Yeah. Oh, I thought you were going to say something else. It's very concerning that we could have these things taking place, and it does. Wow. I keep losing my train of thought in this interview for some reason. I do apologize. Luckily, I can edit out my own gaffes. But yes, we have these. I would say for techno-futurists, to some degree, we may be failing up in these kinds of things. Like, I don't see these technologies being used for purely nefarious purposes. I see them tending to play into the kinds of things that would be of interest to me. A society that's more oriented towards life extension and scientism more broadly, building in ultimately into things like a near Earth development and getting off world and so forth. But the idea that people won't have, it's easy for me to pay lip service to the idea that everyone will be able to have informed consent as to what they're doing. But when you're talking about predictive algorithms and this kind of manipulation, that notion almost becomes an afterthought.
It's like, yeah, you've got free choice, but we've kind of shaped your perception to already know what you're going to do potentially.
Yeah, and that's already a part of our world as well. So
yeah, that's not even science fiction at this point.
Yeah.
This reminds me of Prometheus.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's areas in which we're talking about something that it would be quite literally described as some potentially some kind of hubris. Mm-hmm. And again, like, I don't necessarily subscribe to the ideas that just people's feelings being hurt is the worst thing relative to like ending really serious human problems and challenges. Like, but we have to consider all of these things. We have to consider that this is a part of civil liberties as well. People being able to make have informed consent. Speaking of cloning, I want to and informed consent. I've always felt this, and I wonder if you have an idea. So I was born some decades ago. I was not able to consent to that process.
Right.
That was done without my consent. A clone is effectively someone very rather like me. There is a little bit more consent notion built into that. One could say that it's a little more ethical to clone than to procreate in that regard, because the person involved is able to participate a little bit more in allowing that to proceed. Do you have any thoughts on that notion?
Well, like I was saying previously, I feel like it's just another way for humans to continue being. I just feel like technology has brought us to this point where we don't have to procreate. We can actually rather do cloning. And yes, I feel like that's much better than procreation is almost like a gamble. Mm-hmm. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what that child is going to grow up to be, and what their interests are going to be. But at least with cloning, you have already figured out, okay, like for instance, if I had a child, and rather than making another one, I was like, this one is pretty good. I like this one. I wish I had a couple more of these. I'd rather clone them than make than have a gamble on it. I don't know. That's my thought.
Sure. With the kind of expanded world of the replacement, you're absolutely right that consent is kind of a factor in it. But in this type of world, because the original is consenting to have to be cloned, and with all of the lack of rights that clones actually end up having, our clones kind of are born with the memory of consenting to being second-class citizens. So that's kind of a factor in here, where it's kind of this like shady, shifty way to basically get these clones to be they're not slave labor, but they have less rights, they have less voting rights, and there's kind of an expectation that they're going to do certain type of things. And you're right that as people, it's we put so much emphasis on being able to make informed consent on what's done to us, on what our lives are going to be, but we don't even have informed consent on where we're born, who we're born to, what circumstances we're born into at all. But I feel like that is the one thing that, like, no one has any of that type of control. But beyond that, we start to have the ability to make decisions. We play around with that a little bit, because it is kind of if you were you and born under different circumstances, what would you become? And our clones are all kind of that. Like, if I said, Ben, you know what, instead of doing what you're doing right now, you're going to we're putting you into piano classes, or we're sending you're going to be in the Peace Corps, right now, and you're going to be in some country helping whatever. You're probably going to develop into a completely different type of person. So we're a mix of nature and nurture, and the nature is a very large part of it. The experiences we have largely determine the type of people we are. So yeah, there's a lot of fun things to explore in that, and I like that your party is kind of towing that line between what is best for society while still allowing a certain level of freedom for the people who live within it to make up their own minds and have their own differences of opinions.
Yeah. And it makes this discussion about consent, it brings to mind that so many of the framing of these issues is around basically logical fallacies around tradition. So a person who doesn't want for cloning to be allowed, or some other feature of fertility medicine to be advanced too far, their argument is that these other systems, which are by no means perfect, and in many respects, in the ways that we've described, are more flawed, but they're grandfathered in. They're accepted as even though there's risks and problems associated. They've been with us from time immemorial, so they are acceptable. Improvements are not really considered because of and this is people's most common knee-jerk reaction to these kind of discussions. Really, is a fear about on some social conservative spectrum about loss of humanity and loss of cultural traditions, and it would be foolish not to consider those things. But I'm reminded. I mentioned this a discussion about David Koch and his head. If we go to some of these groups about cloning, you see all manner of lurid descriptions along these kinds, and a lot of it is just these kind of knee-jerk reactions to some loss of humanity. And I'm curious to know. I'm curious to hear from people who have done a lot of research on these subjects what your impressions of some of those things were.
Well, I can say I can see both points of view. Honestly, you're right. We have a ton of baggage from the cultures we come from, the traditions we all have, and a lot of it's learned garbage, right? A lot of it's stuff we just do because our dad did and his grandfather did and his grandfather did and whatever. It seems to work, right? And a lot of it is, no one really knows why we do it. And if you really get down to it, you have this great analogy of the chariots, right? Why don't you talk about that for a second? Because you work with this
is a long one. I'm also a experienced designer, so I run innovation workshops, and I sometimes start my workshops with this little story that NASA was building a rocket to push it out of the Earth's atmosphere, and they couldn't get it out of the Earth's atmosphere because the fuel tank wasn't wide enough to carry enough fuel in it. And then the scientists started doing some research on what they could do about it and why they can't get this rocket ship out of the Earth's atmosphere. Well, they did some research. They found out the fuel tank wasn't wide enough. Why isn't it wide enough? Well, because it comes on a train from somewhere in, I don't know, Texas or something. And it goes through some tunnel that's only so wide. So just because of the train tracks and how wide trains are, that fuel tank can't be wider than that. So then they went back to, well, why are train tracks that wide? Well, it's because the trains were built by the British, who initially created the tramways that were originally that wide. Well, why are the tramways that wide? Well, because they're based on carriages that were only so wide. Why are the carriages so wide? It's because carriage's width is based on the width of two horses. And why are those two? Why is there always two horses? It's because the Greek chariots had two horses on it, and that was our first mode of communication, of transportation. So it's just limitations that we've enforced upon ourselves just because of how we know the world works, and we are always scared of trying new things and questioning how we got here in the first place and what these limitations are, and are they really limitations? So I don't know why.
Well, I mean, it's what we're talking about is like the assumption that the ways we've always done things are right and correct. And in some ways they might be, or they might be effective, just because we as humans tend to build on the shoulders of our ancestors over and over and over. That being said, I don't know that throwing everything away and starting at a blank slate is necessarily going to come with a better solution to everything. It might in some cases.
Might be different.
It might in some cases, and I certainly think that, you know, we generation over generation improve upon every generation's old stuff. That's how we get to the moon. That's how we get to smartphones and the internet, and a global civilization where everyone's sharing cultures, and we're breaking down old-fashioned barriers. I think the road forward is probably somewhere in between. I don't think a McDonaldization of the world where we don't have any, unique cultures or, ways or traditions of doing things is necessarily a desirable one. Where we're all in, gray jumpsuits and, that type of world, it's really, maybe it is, maybe that's the most peaceful world. I think it's less interesting though. And we may differ actually a little bit on this, but I think what makes our cultures interesting is our differences, is different ways of looking at things. And I think to flatten all of those is to lose something special about us. And maybe that's conservative, maybe that's an old traditional type of way. But I think that we can make a more interesting civilization by celebrating the differences and integrating them versus throwing them all away.
Well, I think you just said something about the loss of humanity. I think somewhere along what you're saying is also, when we don't have those differences and we do make everything so flat, if we do, there might be some loss of humanity because everything is just so cookie cutter now.
Whatever humanity is.
And what is humanity?
Yeah.
I see a lot of problems with today's humanity. However you want to define it, like there's problems with differences.
Violence, greed, inequality.
Exactly. Yeah. Like look at the shootings. Look at the mass shootings going on right now. Children, teenagers are doing things that they weren't doing, I don't know, 100 years ago. What's the loss of humanity?
I think there is such a thing, but I totally agree that we cannot be the stagnant culture that refuses to change or refuses to move forward. I just think we need to do it in a smart way, as far as like referencing AI, in a safe way where we have AI that's looking out for the best interest of us, as well as, and we're not just building, the caterpillar, that is the chrysalis for some other type of form of some new life form, some new AI life form that we're not a part of. I mean, we're never going to be able to mourn ourselves if we're not here, and so maybe that's fine. Maybe in the grand scheme of the universe, if we create, some amazing Terminator that, goes on and populates the stars and does amazing things, maybe that's great. But speaking as a human, I would like to be a part of that ride. And I think, yeah, and so doing that in a safe way where we're safeguarding the things we value, and we're burning off the dead wood of old traditions that don't make sense anymore is my preferred method. So I think doing that in a way where we're considering all effects as we move forward is the way I would like to move forward on that. We'll see what happens though.
I think that we just need to accept that the evolution of mankind from this point onward is going to include artificial intelligence, however we define it, you know, it's just going to happen. And we have to just figure out a way of how to be with it and how to evolve with it. It's part of our evolution. There's no way we're going to go forward without it.
It will be, absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned a few moments ago this McDonaldization of culture, and when I think about this in early 21st century terms, I wasn't too concerned because what we're seeing in the news sphere, in the blogosphere, and emerging culture of that time, we're tending to see a proliferation of subcultures and a proliferation of new expressions of traditional cultures and so forth. It wasn't moving in that direction. But when we are talking about the set of things like advanced algorithms, which can predict what people are going to be doing and be kind of driving people in very specific directions, when we're talking about things like Neuralace, that does introduce a new set of concerns for that kind of homogenization of experience. But it's all entirely unproven. I wanted to ask you a question. I do want to go back to filmmaking concerns in a moment, but I wanted to ask you a question. I interviewed a gentleman, Lincoln Cannon, one of the founders of the Mormon Transhumanist Association, a very smart group and a very smart guy. And he spoke about his marriage in the context of something like Neuralace and the idea that this technology will allow people to have some shared experience well beyond what people might experience now. Is there anything about that you guys would find appealing? Maybe it's not something you have to commit to in a constant or persistent way, but something to be dabbling with.
If you're speaking in terms of how Neuralace can help partnership or the understanding of each other. Is that what you?
Yeah, I mean,
and something even more collectivist than that. Yes, a shared experience. I think of a film. It's not aged well, but I think of a film. What's this film with Ralph Fiennes and Angela Bassett about millennial? Say it again. Yeah, Strange Days. That kind of experience. Very
interesting movie. Yeah, I mean, takes empathy to a whole new level, right? And I think something like that actually feels like a very beneficial type of form of type of technology, because I think one of our biggest limitations as a species is we rely on flapping our lips at each other and trying to get the other person to understand our meaning, right? Whereas, like, if we are able to actually directly connect and you feel what I feel and you know what I'm talking about without me having to articulate it and express it with whatever limitations my vocabulary has, you're going to know what I'm thinking, and there's not going to be any like bad faith or lies or any of that type of or projection going on. We can understand each other even if we disagree. You can be like, oh, I see what you're saying there. Oh, I really know what you're saying.
Yeah, a better understanding.
And especially I think with couples, oh man, that would be such an amazing thing. I mean, imagine our fights would just dramatically drop.
So dramatic.
Yes. No,
I would understand why Sean wants to play video games for so long. Sean would understand why I have so much love for cats. We wouldn't have problems.
That's nice. It's something I would like to experience too, and it's something that I there's a certain sense in which that sidekick, that virtual Ben, I might want to maybe try the blending of virtual persons before I want to try the blending of real persons and see how it starts to work at first in the virtual personality space. But I'm definitely also would be quite tickled to try some things like that. I was talking to my friend Natasha Bitemore about this, and I've had people doing this to a lesser degree recently, or not doing this, but people coming to me with concepts for a science fiction story and saying, I really want to develop this. help me figure out how to do that. Now, you guys have done this with this short. It's a award-winning short. You've had some successes in this area, and of course, it's not an overnight success. You've been both working in this field for quite some time in various projects. But because so many people are asking me or other people how to do this, do you have any advice for people if they particularly want to be? Most of these people do want to work on some kind of techno-futurist project, but any sort of general advice about how to do how to succeed in this area?
Go ahead.
So my suggestion would be, I often hear really amazing concept ideas for as far as sci-fi, techno-futurist type of societies that people want to explore. The biggest problem I often see is the stories are concept heavy and not character heavy. So I think the key really is to personalize it and make us care about the people who are going through it. And oftentimes, if you can give us a character who is kind of experiencing it for the first time so that we can relate to them, or even if, and you can create great world building around this type of thing and see them interacting with it. If we care about them and we can care about their plight, everything else clicks into place. If it's too petty, I mean, even in like some of the best, like, ones we've seen recently, like Ex Machina or Her, these are all very based on these main characters who we can empathize. So having empathetic characters that you can follow through these type of stories will really kick your thing into high gear. And if you've got a great concept, and the other thing I would say is people are smarter than people often give them credit to. So you don't necessarily need to explain every aspect and do the exposition, the yarn diagram on your thing on exactly how your world works. Just tell us, let us be a fly on the wall in that type of world, and we'll pick. Yeah.
I would say, like, in all the festivals that we've traveled to, we didn't go to every single film festival. Movie has been in over 70 plus festivals. We went to the few big ones, and the immediate feedback that we got was this: that our story had a character that was relatable. Most other short sci-fis, because a short science fiction film has to have so much packed into it. You're trying to build a world, and you're trying to tell people what this world looks like, how things are different. It's so easy to lose that human touch or that empathy. That's the one thing that we got feedback on, that our character was so easy to empathize with, and it didn't just feel like a short that was just made to show off, like, we can do visual effects.
You see a lot of those.
And we can have a concept. It was way more than that. It follows a human that people can relate to.
Yeah, and it's slightly different enough in the future that you can recognize, our own culture there, and you can also see how things are just changed just a little bit, and that kind of helps. Even in Star Trek, watch the Star Trek shows. It's set in this far off future, but all of the characters and the situations, you're like, oh, just if the technology were just slightly different, how would you approach these type of things? And still relatable.
Yeah, it's kind of same problems, different era.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Star Trek, because I think of those plot through lines in the Star Trek universe, and also how that's evolved, from the original series to the Next Generation. Those were more serialized kind of stories, not as much character driven, and they've really moved towards more character driven things, certainly in Discovery and more recent iterations, and that is kind of upset some of the purists of in these communities, but from a storytelling perspective, it's a pretty sound move.
And I think there's a balance you can achieve where, like, I still love the Next Generation, all those type of things. And I think there's great character stuff in there. I think the new stuff just being internally consistent in the world you have really goes a long way. And I think the originals really did that really well. So as long as you're able to do that and give us good characters that we like and understand, it really helps.
And world building.
Yeah.
As much world building as they can do.
Even subtly.
Like little tiny details, they go a long way. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to have all these visual effects. It could be something so small, so minute, that can have an impact on the story.
Yeah, such as an alley covered in election posters, or small personal hologram HUDs that people have as they're interacting in the regular world. Doesn't have to be faster than light travel and gunships blazing rail cannons onto the moon's surface. I mean, those are all cool.
Yeah.
You can make that movie, but they're a lot less personal.
Like Her.
And they're a lot more expensive.
Like Her does it. There's nothing extra. There's no extra visual effects. There's just a voice you keep hearing, and there's no extra practical things that are attached to the ear or anything. It's just like you hear this voice, and it's the sound design. It's just the sound design that makes it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go all expensive. Just be smart with how you present the new world.
Yeah, and that is a really good example of a film that transhumanists were able to look at and say, this is it doesn't describe a dystopian scenario. It's not just a lot of space opera kind of pew pew, but it was just a strong script and a strong production and fascinating themes and a really kind of a great nexus of all of those things. That is really a really good way to be doing this. You guys, well, I hope the guys who are watching this able to I imagine draw a lot of inspiration from you, and I think there's some great insights there. People, I'm going to refer to people when they ask me these questions. I'm going to say, look at this part of the time code of this talk. Well, this has been a really wonderful chat. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about The Replacement, about projects that you're working on, about technofuturism in fiction generally, that you'd like to leave us with some final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So we're definitely developing The Replacement into something bigger. But we're also developing another script. Actually, the script is already written. We just have to start production. It's another short sci-fi on time travel. It's kind of like Kill Bill plus Looper, altered version, with female characters. I'll be directing it, and Sean will be producing this one for me because he owes me one. But that's our next project. We already have some good names attached to it that we can't say. But that's our next one. And it's also going to be similar in terms of quality of production, if not more, since now our previous film has made some news, much more news than our previous projects. We're going to use that momentum to put whatever we can on screen for this next project.
Yeah. So if any of your viewers want to see more, you can look up The Replacement on YouTube. Currently hosted right now under Dell Studios, and you can go to thereplacementmovie.com and see a little bit more about how we made it. See some of the we put together a series of fun fake political campaign ads for the first clone president, and get your own clone type of commercial type of stuff. And we're very interested in the transhumanist movement and society moving closer towards an integration with artificial intelligence, biotechnology, cybernetics, and the hopeful aspects that come along with that, as well as the the more skeptical side of us, where we're a little bit, we have a little bit of a caution, but I think we both think that this is, in general, there's a lot of hopeful things that can come out of this.
You can also follow The Replacement on Instagram at The Replacement Movie, and on Twitter at Vote for Clones, 4 as a number. That's my plug.
There you go.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, and it's so interesting that you mentioned moving some of those roles around. You guys have had done such incredible work and had such incredible success, and it's really nice to see people that have this kind of working relationship. We should all be so lucky in any endeavor to be able to work in this way. So it was really wonderful talking with you guys. So many interesting subjects that we got to. I thank you again for doing this, Naz and Sean. This was really a lot of fun for me.
Thank you so much, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Really appreciate being on this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. And let us know about the presidential AI president thing. We'll talk to you about that.
I'll go out to see.
Yeah. We're still trying to figure out a date because we have Irai, who's in Turkey. And it's a little bit of a scheduling thing. He might actually have to kind of bow out so we can just have the stateside folks doing it at normal hours. But we're still trying to figure that out. But hopefully sometime we can all get on board with doing that sometime, maybe even this week.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
And for having us on.
Yeah. This is fun. Okay. All right.